The last time my family spoke to me like I mattered was the night they left me standing alone in our living room right after my mother introduced me as the disappointing one. I remember the sting more than the silence, and I remember thinking, for the first time, that maybe disappearing was kinder than staying. My name is Celestra Wynne, and this is the story of what happened when the family that once erased me tried to put me on display only to watch the man they worshipped stand at attention. For me, I left the mountain in silence, the kind that follows you long after the steel doors close behind you. The drive out of Colorado carved a straight line into the cold, and I let it. It had been 3 years since I last turned toward Jackson Hole, and every mile made my chest tighter, the way it always did when I headed back to a place that remembered me far less than I remembered it. By the time my tires crunched over the old dirt road that led to my parents' house, nothing had changed. Snow layered the roof in the same uneven patches. The porch light still flickered when the wind kicked up, and the smell of something roasting drifted through the air like a memory I didn't ask for. Familiar, yes. Welcoming, never. My mother barely glanced at me when I stepped through the door. She kept tying ribbons around a wreath, muttering about centerpieces and head counts, acting as though I'd stepped out for groceries instead of disappearing from their lives for years. Inside the living room, wall after wall was crowded with Emma's milestones caps, gowns, mountain summits, dress fittings. Not a trace of me past my early 20s. It shouldn't have stung anymore. Yet somehow it still did. Dinner was the same script. I remembered everyone buzzing about the engagement. No one acknowledging my presence. Even the neighbor's old cat brushed my leg with more intention than my own family. I escaped to the kitchen for a moment of air and found a stack of papers beside the sink. A guest list. My eyes skimmed then froze. Rowan Hale. The name hit me like a dropped weight. A man whose path should never cross mine in a room full of civilians. And suddenly, the engagement party wasn't just a celebration. It was a collision course. The house woke early the next morning, buzzing with preparations for the rehearsal dinner, and I tried to disappear into a quiet corner of the kitchen. I kept my back to the room, rinsing dishes that didn't need rinsing. Anything to avoid being pulled into the orbit I'd spent my whole life orbiting around but never belonging to. Of course, hiding never works in families like mine. Someone always finds a way to tighten the invisible leash. My uncle leaned against the counter, studying me like a problem he'd always meant to fix. He wondered aloud if I had ever thought about changing careers, said certain office jobs could trap a person, especially someone without direction. I swallowed the sigh rising in my chest. Moments later, my mother drifted in, trailing the scent of floral spray as she sorted napkins. She reminded me not to bring up anything work-related in front of guests because no one wanted to hear about dull tasks during a celebration. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't have to. Then Emma peeked in, already glowing with pre-wedding excitement. She asked me not to make Rowan uncomfortable, explaining he was outgoing and could get tense if people around him were too serious. As if seriousness was a flaw I carried deliberately. By afternoon, seating assignments were laid out across the dining table. My mother placed my name card at the very end, near the back door, smiling as though she'd done me a kindness. Easier for me to slip out if something came up, she said. I understood the real reason immediately. It was the seat reserved for the person you didn't want framed in any family photo. I sat there anyway, listening to them chatter about flower colors, cake fillings, table runners. I traced every movement in the room without meaning to who stood where, how people shifted, where the nearest exit was, old habits from another world. Not a single face turned toward me. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a placeholder. When the noise got too tight around my ribs, I stepped outside onto the porch. The light from the window spilled across the snow, and in that pale wash, I saw a shape standing beside my father. Rowan had arrived earlier than expected, smiling politely as he shook my father's hand. I froze in the doorway, his head lifted, eyes catching mine for just a fraction of a second. Something flickered there, a spark of confusion, recognition trying to form a shape. It slipped across his features so quickly, anyone else would have missed it. But I didn't. I felt the shift like pressure dropping before a storm. Rowan had seen me somewhere his fiancé could never imagine. No, he had heard me. A voice you only hear through layers of static, over open channels meant for men who go into places most people hope never to think about. And that was the moment I knew the danger wasn't just in being overlooked anymore. It was in being recognized. The rehearsal dinner glowed warm and golden, full of clinking glasses and soft laughter meant to make everyone feel at ease. I stayed along the edges, a shadow moving between pockets of conversation. Careful not to stand anywhere Rowan's gaze could settle too long. But recognition, once awakened, doesn't need direct eye contact. It hunts. Emma brought him around for introductions, beaming as she spoke. When she gestured toward me with her usual vague description, I watched Rowan's expression shift by degrees, first polite, then uncertain, then something sharper. His eyes widened just enough to register the echo of a memory brushing past him. I felt my pulse climb. He wasn't reacting to me as Emma's sister. He was trying to place a voice, a tone, a command wrapped inside a moment he survived. A server brushed by, and Rowan's glass trembled in his hand. Not from nerves, not from excitement. I recognized the stance, instantly, shoulders angling, weight shifting, body bracing itself around a question he hadn't yet articulated. He was sifting through fragments he didn't know he'd kept. I held still, hoping the distance between our worlds would muffle whatever trace of me he was reaching for. Then he turned to greet someone, and the cuff of his sleeve pulled back. The scar, long, pale, unmistakably placed exactly where the post-mission report had marked it. Kingsport Icefall. A mission that should have stayed sealed behind thick metal doors and security clearances. A mission where hesitation would have meant he and his team never came home, and I had been the one to authorize the extraction. The floor didn't move. But my balance did, not because of fear of him, but because of what would happen if he succeeded in stitching that memory to my face. In this room, I was supposed to be the quiet sister with the forgettable job. If Rowan remembered who I truly was, everything this family built on assumption and ignorance would crack open, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would be the same after that. I walked into the engagement hall by the lake, already mapping exits in the back of my mind. It wasn't paranoia. It was muscle memory. And while everyone else moved through the room with the ease of people who felt they belonged, I kept tracking the one person whose memory could unravel me with a single spark. Rowan stood near the far wall, posture too controlled for a man at a celebration. He didn't know yet why his gaze kept drifting toward me, but I could feel the pull tightening. My mother swept toward me the moment I stepped inside. She adjusted my arm like she was straightening a crooked prop and told me not to stand too close to the center because it would take attention from Emma. The comment grazed something old in me, but I let it pass the way I always had. When the music softened, she floated onto the stage and took the microphone with a practiced smile. She praised Emma and Rowan with theatrical warmth, then tossed my name out like an afterthought, making a joke about not quite remembering what I did in Colorado. Laughter rippled through the room, light enough that no one would ever admit it stung, but it settled under my ribs like a familiar weight. An aunt approached next, patting my arm as if consoling a child. She asked if I was managing on my own these days, unaware she was speaking to someone who spent most of her life dealing with pressure she couldn't imagine. I nodded. The easiest way to end the conversation. Across the room, Rowan shifted, shoulders squared, feet angled, not a social adjustment, an operational one. His attention locked on me with the unmistakable focus of someone combing through buried fragments. When Emma pulled me closer for a group photo, he tilted his head the way a seal does when something doesn't add up. His eyes fixed on me, unblinking, a crease forming between his brows. One breath, one flicker, and I could tell he'd touched the edge of a memory he wasn't supposed to have. The celebration grew louder as the night stretched on, but Rowan stayed unnervingly sober, like he'd slipped into a different frequency. I lingered near the buffet table, pretending to study the food while keeping my expression blank. The more I avoided meeting his eyes, the more determined he seemed to track me through the crowd. He eventually drifted toward me, stopping at a polite distance. He said my name like it was a test soft, cautious, searching. I answered with the same careful neutrality, hoping not to give anything away. He started to speak again, then froze, as if a distant sound threaded through his memory. My gaze fell to his wrist, and everything inside me tightened. The scar, faint but unmistakable, rested exactly where the medical report placed it after the Kingsport icefall mission. Rowan followed my eyes, and the realization that washed over him wasn't subtle. He closed his hand over the mark, not out of shame, but instinct, the way a person shields the connection between past and present. A server bumped him, and the glass slipped from his fingers. The sharp crack of it hitting the floor cut through the room, but his reaction afterward told the real story. His hand trembled not from surprise, but from recognition flickering to life. He stared at me with widening clarity. I saw shock, disbelief, questions he wasn't ready to voice. He stepped back, chest rising as if bracing himself, his mouth parted. And for a terrifying moment, I thought he might speak a title that would shatter the entire evening. Emma appeared at his side, asking if he was all right. He answered after a long second, but his eyes never left mine. Something in him had clicked into place. Maybe my stance, maybe my eyes, maybe a command he once heard in the dark. Whatever it was, the truth had surfaced. Rowan was remembering me, and there was no turning it back. The night reached that delicate point when a party feels balanced on its own excitement, right before everything slips. The DJ lowered the music. Lights dipped warmer, and my mother claimed the microphone as if she'd rehearsed the moment in front of a mirror. I stayed exactly where she wanted me at the far end of the room, tucked behind a floral arrangement big enough to hide a person's entire existence. Then she called my name, loud and bright enough to cut through every conversation. She wanted me on stage. She wanted me in the frame. She wanted control, and pulling me forward was her way of tightening her grip. Stepping toward her, I felt dozens of eyes lift toward me, curiosity mixing with that soft, polite pity people reserve for someone they assume hasn't made much of their life. My mother leaned close when I reached her side. Her whisper, sharp as a wire, "Keep smiling. Don't make things awkward." I forced a steady breath, letting the years of discipline smooth out any reaction. She lifted the mic again, praising Emma's future with Rowan, then tossed a jab in my direction about how impressive it was that I'd managed to show up despite my busy office job. Laughter trickled through the hall, and there, just beyond the first row of guests, Rowan stood 5 steps back, his expression locked not in amusement, but in something far more focused. Emma slipped beside me for a photo, grabbing my wrist. Her fingers brushed the device hidden under my sleeve. A faint green light blinked once. No one else noticed, but Rowan did. I watched the shift in his pupils, the tension pulling through his shoulders. He wasn't confused. He was recognizing something he didn't yet have words for. Before I could move away, a sharp crack snapped through the room. Rowan's glass had fallen, shattering across the floor. He stepped back, spine straightening, heels together, shoulders pinned back with military precision. He wasn't posing. He wasn't embarrassed. He was standing at attention. The room fell silent in an instant. He had identified me completely. The moment Rowan locked into that rigid stance, the atmosphere in the hall twisted into something electric and confused. Guests stared, whispering in fragmented questions. Emma, pale and frantic, rushed toward him, demanding to know what he was doing. But Rowan didn't acknowledge her. He couldn't. His eyes stayed fixed on me, locked in a depth of recognition that reached far beyond family introductions. My mother tried to diffuse the tension with a laugh that scraped across the room. She called him dramatic, insisted he loosen up, then reached for his arm to tug him out of the posture. The instant she touched him, he recoiled sharply, like her hand had struck a live wire. Gasps bounced around the room. It was the kind of reaction only someone trained for danger would have: automatic, instinctive, unfiltered. Rowan parted his lips, and sound pushed out of him, low and shaking not from fear, but from the weight of the truth assembling itself inside his mind. He addressed me with a formality that didn't belong in a lakeside banquet hall. A few nearby guests stiffened, turning to stare between us. Emma's voice cracked as she asked what I had done to cause this. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The evidence was unfolding without my involvement. Rowan finally forced out more words, halting, strained. He spoke of a mission, a frozen extraction, a voice he had followed through the worst night of his life. He said he recognized the cadence, the steadiness, the decision that saved him. Silence swallowed the entire room. My mother blinked, struggling to reconcile the version of me she had always believed with the one Rowan was naming aloud. I straightened, a quiet certainty settling through me. Rowan tried to continue, but emotion and instinct pinned him wordless. Everything in his stance, his posture, his eyes, his breath pointed to one truth. He wasn't just reacting, he was saluting a superior in front of every person who had spent years refusing to see me. And in that moment, without a single raised voice, the balance of power shifted, irrevocably. The room felt compressed, as if the air itself had tightened around us. Rowan remained locked in that rigid stance, eyes fixed on me with the unblinking intensity of a man confronting the one person who held authority over his survival. His breathing stayed controlled, steady in a way that didn't belong in a celebration, but on a battlefield. One by one, heads turned toward me, and I felt the weight of recognition settle over the hall like they were seeing me for the first time in my entire life. Emma's voice cracked as she asked why he was standing like that. Rowan didn't answer. He couldn't. My mother stepped forward instead, her hands trembling as she tried to regain control of the moment, asking what I'd done to frighten him. She didn't realize she was the one nearing a truth far bigger than her comfort could contain. Then Rowan spoke. His voice cut through the silence with surgical clarity as he identified me, the one who had ordered his extraction from Kingsport's freezing hell. A wave of shock rolled across the room. Utensils clattered. Someone whispered in disbelief. I stayed still, letting the truth hang. My mother stared as if the world had tilted. She asked what I really did in Colorado. I finally answered her, calm, unshaking. I did the work she never cared to understand, and in that moment, the room bowed not out of obligation, but out of fear disguised as awe. No one invited me forward, yet the entire room stepped back, as if clearing space for a verdict they'd spent years avoiding. I stood before the still live microphone, feeling the hum of it beneath my fingertips, and for the first time in my life, I let the truth break the surface. What just happened constitutes a breach of sensitive information. My identity cannot appear in civilian settings of this size. The reaction was instant. My mother's mouth fell open, her breath catching like she'd been struck. She stared at me, the way you look at someone wearing a mask you suddenly realize isn't a mask at all. She reached for me, arms wide, trying to salvage something she thought she could still hold. She pleaded to know why I'd hidden this, insisting she would have been proud, that she would have bragged. I stepped back not angrily, but with finality. If I'd told you, you would have called it bragging. If I stayed quiet, you decided I failed. The truth was never going to fit the version of me you preferred. Emma broke next. She demanded to know what kind of work could make Rowan react like that. Why I'd kept her in the dark. I told her simply because the country forbade it. Silence swallowed the room. Then I delivered the part they weren't ready for. After tonight, my civilian contacts must be restricted. I can't maintain our relationship the way it was. My mother cried. Emma crumpled into a chair, but I wasn't sorry. Rowan still stood at rigid attention, carved from duty. I released him with a quiet command. He exhaled, but his eyes held respect that hadn't been there hours earlier. I walked out untouched, leaving behind a celebration in ruins and a family finally forced to see the stranger they'd always refused to know. Winter in Montana carries a cold that settles straight into the bones, but it never feels hostile to me. It feels clean, honest. I spend my days in a Northern Command facility where silence is normal, not suspicious, and where no one fills the quiet with assumptions about who I should be. People here care about precision, readiness, responsibility, nothing more, nothing less. No one asks why I keep my life offline. No one measures my worth by titles or family narratives. They simply expect me to do my job well. And I do. One afternoon, an envelope arrived, heavy paper, embossed edges, the faint scent of my mother's perfume clinging to it like a memory that didn't know it wasn't welcome. Inside was Emma and Rowan's wedding portrait, both of them smiling. Untouched by the chaos of that night, I felt no bitterness, no sting of comparison, just an unexpected lightness. I filled out the RSVP with steady handwriting, unable to attend due to national assignment. Nothing more. Later, on the observation deck, snow swept across the mountains in soft arcs, no voices behind me, no expectations, no shadows from the past, just me finally breathing in a life I chose, free of the place where I'd once been erased.